Hey, thanks everybody for joining and looking forward to not just sharing some value with you all, but also hearing from us. I know I've thankfully been in more meetings like this in the last week and a half than I've been in the last couple months, just because it's been great to get feedback from others and see what others are doing well to navigate this deal that we're going through. And I'll turn it over to Chris here in a second, but Chris and I were talking last week and just connecting and seeing how we could serve each other and also serve others. And I'm big on remote. I've worked remotely for more than a decade, and we're talking about how some different ways that we could serve others right now. And we're talking about how maybe even doing a webinar like this on remote. And I told Chris, yeah, I'd love to do that and can't wait to do that. But to me, hey, first, we need to get some of the things that you're really strong on, you being Chris, and that's just navigating this crisis as leaders and entrepreneurs or whatever we are in here. Just from my vantage point, there's a lot of stress and a lot of just things that we're trying to navigate through. But there's so much opportunity, and I've known Chris for so many years, and I've always known Chris to be really great in terms of helping individuals to get their mind right and not just focus on the tactics first, but actually how we need to be as people to be able to execute those tactics. And he's helped me through that through the years very much. So anyway, that's why I said, hey, I'd love to talk about remote, but to me, that can happen in the future. We first need to talk about navigating this crisis and putting ourselves in the right position. And that's where Chris is really strong, of course, in many other areas too. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to lead us through. I'd say take great notes. Also, if you have questions for the group, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll have time for questions as well, I'm sure. And then also, definitely there's time to contribute because we're all here to gather from each other. So we'd love to hear what some of everybody's feedback and suggestions later as well. So Chris, turn it over to you.
Yeah, great, thanks. So here's what we'll do. Avin, can you mute everybody, and then we'll unmute here in a few after we have some banter. And then like there's Q&A too. What I'd like to do is we can stop the recording for the Q&A. That way we want to share the content, but people maybe not want to put their personal stuff out there. We can respect that as well. Is that cool?
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'm joining you all from the seacoast in New Hampshire, United States. And Avin's joining you all from Florence, Italy, right? So that's where we are. So we're kind of covering parts of the globe here today. In essence, this is a very interesting time in history for all of us. No one here, including ourselves, has navigated what we're navigating. And so before I get into some kind of content here that I want to share, I just want to share any level of condolences to anyone that is personally affected by COVID right now. We have two good friends that are in ICU right now in two different hospitals. One's in Tufts Medical and the other one's in Jake's. So, I think what we're dealing with is going to affect everybody on a personal level one way or another. And I think it's relevant to bring that up because it's part of our content that we're going to talk about today, quite frankly. Because the fact of the matter is that I'm going to talk through a little bit of a continuum here, but there's certain things that we have to address and pay attention to if we want to be able to navigate this in the most appropriate way and not become blind, basically have blinders on and have blind spots according to opportunities that are going to be present. And anytime, this is if you look back at history, the times like the Great Depression, I'm not saying I want to go into a depression, but situations where there's huge shifts in stuff that went on, quite frankly, there was a lot of shifts in regards to wealth creation and where people were able to navigate and pivot, and businesses even came out of that. And Avin and I both agree that we're in a time in history right now that 6 months plus from now, easily or less, there's going to be quite a shift in regards to how we work. Things aren't going to go back. If you think you're sitting out there right now, things are going to go back to where they were exactly in 3 to 4 months, we totally wholeheartedly
disagree, I think.
Disagree. The fact of the matter is that, you know, this isn't just going to, boom, we're going to go back into where we were before. So what we're here to talk about today really is how do Avin and I were talking about what we wanted to talk about, and he made a good point. It's like, well, if this goes back to you, and it goes back to all of you, right? And in fact, the matter is that if I want to put myself in a position where I am going to navigate this at a best self scenario, then I really need to work on myself first. That's if I'm in fear, if I'm dealing with all sorts of emotional stuff, if my household's turned upside down, it's going to lead into more of a challenge in relationship to how we navigate this. So first order of business is that I've got to deal with what's at hand, and that's me, period. And so it's going to start with us. And think about this also. If I'm going to explore opportunities or if I'm going to navigate some level of change with what's in order right here, I'm going to have to look at things differently than I probably am now, which is I'm going to have to potentially change as much as the situation is going to change. So that's what's at hand on that also, is like, okay, I have to be open. I think the one thing we all got to walk away from is that I have to be open to change just as much as other things are going to change, especially if I'm going to drive change in my world. And if I bring the same old version of me and the same level of psychology and the same paradigms to this new problem, I may not be able to navigate this in its entirety in the best format, right? So so that's the first order of business, and I would write that down and note it. Okay. The second thing is, so how do I make sure that I'm able to do that, right? And I think the first piece is there's new stress in the environment, and we're probably all carrying more stress than we normally do. So how do I manage that? Well, I would recommend a higher level of stress response than I normally am. Then what's going to happen is I'm going to be not in a good place, right? So, okay, how do I handle that, Chris? Exercise, get outside, obviously. I would also highly recommend, if you have interest in this, you can just send me a note. Meditation is good at this point in time. And also doing something like a breathing, like a resonance breathing, something, because if I can regulate, it's been proven, if I can regulate my breath pattern, we all breathe 12 to 15 minutes a minute. If I am stressed out, my thoughts are running even more ragged, and believe it or not, this has been totally studied. I'm going to breathe at a higher rate. My thoughts go at a higher rate. My cortisol levels go up. All correlated. So how do I force the equation of slowing that down? Resonance breathing. So there's actually an app. I'm not going to go through the exercise right now, but there is an app that's free, and I can follow this app and just follow the tones and deregulate my nervous system and come out of that flight or flight response and re-regulate cortisol levels, helps me sleep at night. There's all sorts of positive benefit. They say, well, that's not something I normally do. Well, hey, if your stress level's down, then don't worry about it. But for most of us, including myself, I mean, I'm doing more yoga, more breath work right now than I normally do, because I want to make sure that I'm dialed in there. So that's a key. And the fact of the matter is also, guys, you gotta understand is entrepreneurs, which everyone on here is probably an entrepreneur of some sort. We typically run hard. We typically fill our days. And what ends up happening is we become callous and desensitized to how much stress we're carrying. Our blood pressure can tell us where that's at. There are things we can do. I wear a Whoop, things that we can do to give us some, our HRV or whatever that is. Look at that. He's like, oh, you got a Whoop too? See, well, we're meant to be. So whatever it is that we need to do to give us some biofeedback, if we're not tuned in until we become more conscious and aware, and that's another reason I like yoga or mindfulness, things that help us stay in the moment and become more self-aware of what's going on. So taking care of yourself, number one. Number two, in that same regard, Um, I want to take care of my family and friends, right? So outside of getting good sleep and eating well and managing stress response the best way, then I also want to make sure I'm supporting my family and my friends. Because if I'm not, it's going to weigh on me, right? Like I didn't tell Jolie until last night that I invited her mom to dinner. And so I put the computer up the end of the table and she's like, whoa, what's going on? I'm like, oh, I invited mom to dinner. It's like, again? I'm like, yeah. Like, she's alone, does like, let's, it not only feeds us and makes us feel good, but it's just another connection. So now, I know there's family and friends you can reach out to, and it's also something you can do, right? I think a lot of us, I don't want to project here, but at times we could feel helpless. Like, what can I do? Like, there's so much shit going on. There's so much suffering and pain and craziness. And we all know if we look at the stats, things are going to get worse before they get better, at least here in America. Other parts of the world, maybe it's starting to taper off. Maybe it's starting to improve. Regardless, I've got to be able to disassociate from that in a positive way. Now, like if you're in the military, like one things I learned when I studied neuro-linguistic programming or NLP is that, there's times when I want to be fully associated. Hey, it's a good time to journal, good time to practice gratitude journaling, things like that to stay positive right now and connect with our emotions and where we are and check in. But there's also going to be times during the day where we're going to want to practice disassociation, meaning that, hey, I'm going to check in on the problems in the world. I'm going to be associated. I'm going to process that. I'm going to do something to work out, break away from it, and then I'm going to disassociate it right now. I can't help you if I'm trying to pay attention to what's going on in the media right now, or if someone's posting something. So I got to guard my gates and be mindful of how much negative shit I'm letting in, and also I'm supporting my families. We're all working out of home, most of us. So how do you manage the environment where you work and with your family and support them is another key element. So that's the other piece I want to offer to you. So again, a few things we've talked about is one is balancing the nervous system, really important. Two is taking care, with that in mind, self-care, exercise, nutrition, things that we need to do, things along that line. Supporting our family and our friends, and then also our teams. Those are leading a lot. I know see some business leaders on here. I know there's some owners of large companies. Please make sure that you're supporting your teams. Be there for them. Schedule extra time to check in. Hey, how are you? How are things going in your family? What's going on? Maybe more than you ever typically have, because this is a good time to do that, right? The other side of that is that now, and also I talked about gratitude, and I talked about the idea of staying positive and not getting wrapped up in the other stuff. So now I'm going to navigate through. Avin, do you want to add to that, any of that right there before I start getting into stages to navigate this?
No, I think it's perfect. I think at the end I'd like to follow up with you about a couple questions of how we follow through on a couple of those. But no, great so
far. So if I want to, I know there's an easy way. Actually, I'm just going to walk through a hierarchy right now, and I can share it later on with everyone if you want. So imagine a 5-stage hierarchy in regards to what a company needs or an entrepreneur needs to navigate through. And each of these stages, one builds on top of the other one. The first stage that some people are still in is crisis response. We got a crisis, I got to respond. For a lot of people, I got to get remote. I got to get my team remote. I know also we're home teachers. Holy shit, we're going to be home teachers for a while now. How are we going to do that? How are we going to run that? So like the first, I'm telling you, like week number 2 was pretty rough, right? Week number 3, things start to improve. We find a little bit of sync, right? It's not, I'd say it's perfect, but that's that crisis response level. It's the first 30 days that we're entering something and then our ability to move out to the next piece. So once I'm past that stage, the next piece is called survival. A lot of people are in right now. Survival is like, okay, how do I make sure that I can navigate and sustain my life, my business for the next 4 to 6 months? I need a 4 to 6 month plan. So a lot of people sat out there, and this builds on top of like, say, well, how does this have to do with finding opportunities? Trust me, if you're stuck in survival mode, you're gonna have a really freaking hard time getting to the later stages when you're looking for opportunities. Survival mode is in essence like, how do I cover cash flow and how do I dial things in? So how do you do that? Hey, hopefully you have an amazing financial advisor. If you don't, In fact, I have a resource of someone who's actually dedicating office hours each week to work with people and just answer questions at no charge. There's actually an amazing financial advisor on here. I'm sure that would do the same thing. So I have people resources that I'm happy to refer out, but check in with someone that has, has probably been through this kind of thing before, at least financially, and can just give you some shrewd advice on how to navigate that. And then that way, as long as you know, like, hey, I'm going to be good. It's not going to be ideal, but it's a little easier for us to change our lifestyle because I'm not traveling right now. Like that cost just got moved aside. And so, there's a lot of things that we can adjust, right? So that's get out of survival mode as quick as possible. Make sure you can stay solvent for the next 4 to 6 months. Then the next piece is recovery. Okay, now that's the third stage, recovery. Hey, look at that. How do we get that up there? Did you do that, Avin? You're brilliant.
Yeah.
So the next stage is recover, right? How do we pivot operations and revenue channels? Like what needs to happen in order to, let's say, okay, what does that mean? Well, for example, this is a restaurant in town, but in essence, I remember talking to one of our favorite restaurants in town, and he runs a really good chef. And I was chatting with him, and I'm like, hey, on Facebook, I'm like, hey, you gonna do takeout? He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, why? He's like, my model wasn't built for that. And I'm like, dude, you've got to pivot. Like, it's like my offering wasn't matched to that. I'm like, okay. I said, build a new menu. Build a new menu. You're an amazing chef. I'm sure you can make other stuff. Adapt to what families need right now. Think of family size. So we kind of bantered back and forth. And I really supported him, and he did. And in fact, within the 2 weeks' time, he had to bring a sous chef into the kitchen to help him because he couldn't get it all done in the 3 days that he's offering these dinners. And it's going very well for him. And he's been selling most nights. He's been selling out. People calling in can't get any more because he's maxed. He's at so it's and that's just a restaurant, right? Last night we were watching a replay of Modern Family late last night, and Avin and I saw like at least two commercials. That, like, I think Hyundai was one where, hey, we're in this together, blah, 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 blah. You buy a car, and you're impacted over the next 6 months from COVID or whatever, yada, yada, yada. You're not going to have to worry about paying your car bill. Like things like that. That's pivoting, right? It's looking at what's going on and figuring out what needs to change. The problem with this recovery mode, guys, is that if I'm in a place where I'm looking things the same way, I'm gonna have a challenge. You say, okay, well, how do I help get through that, Chris? Well, this is what I'm going to recommend to you. I would build one of a couple things. You got three good solid options. One is build a virtual mastermind, or get part of a virtual roundtable, or build one out where you've got other people who are like in my virtual mastermind degree. Avin's in that picture, right? I get together with him. We can talk. We both run businesses with teams, and we both serve similar markets. So we can chat about we're in different industries, but we can talk about what are you doing? What am I doing? He can give me ideas. I can give him ideas. I can challenge him on bullshit. He can challenge me on bullshit. We can work back and forth. So that way I can get other perspective, right? And when you put anybody in any of these teams, you got to have someone who's positive, someone who's growth directed, someone that's got good psychology, someone who's innovative, and someone who's going to call you on your bullshit. Because if someone's not going to challenge you when you need it, what good is it? You don't need someone to blow sunshine up your rear end right now. It's not going to be helpful to you. So I would build out something like that. The other piece is, like, you could always reach out to someone or hire somebody to help you. Just make sure that there's fruit on the tree. Someone's helped someone else navigate. The challenge with blind spots, guys, and this is worth writing down, is we can't see our own blind spots. I mean, I pay someone to coach me. Why? I can't see my own blind spots. I can see someone else's in a heartbeat, but I can't see my flipping own. So we need someone to reflect back at this point in time in order to start going through recovery. And we also have to break out of this idea of attachment, that I have got to do something a certain way. Things aren't going to always stay the same anyway. The idea of impermanence is things are in constant change and shift all the time now, regardless. It doesn't matter. It always was that way. And when people realize, like, well, holy crap, I'm like, this thing all came down and I'm not in control. Guess what, guys? You weren't in control to begin with. We just realized the reality that we weren't in control. So, but you can control your response. You can control your psychology, you can control your emotional context, and you control the strategies that you choose. Those are the three things that you can do to navigate through this. And as we get from recovery, then the next piece is, all right, what are we going to do next? Well, then now we're going to talk about growth. Like, in essence, like, how do we not only sustain profitability, but how can we thrive? What if, and Avin and I talked about this when we had actually, his wife and I when this all started coming down here in America, we a few weeks ago, we did a Facebook Live. And one of the things that, Avin kind of presented was like, what if we could actually economically be better for this? Or what if, shit, our lives got better for this? Like, what if we created some new normal that benefited us, that we carry forward, that came from the change, right? Because there's enough negative shit that's going to happen or is happening from this. Don't get me wrong, but there's a gift here too. It comes down to how well you're looking for that gift. And this could be the trajectory for the growth that you could ideally see. And then from there, the next piece is in essence working on that longer term vision. And which is kind of interesting because my business, a lot of my business people hire me to work on their vision, right? Usually it's 1, 3, and 5 years. Well, no one's really hiring me right now to come fly out to New Hampshire and do a vision workshop and to work on their 3-year vision in most cases because, well, I've had to come down cycle in regards to the pyramid because I have to bring them through that, which works out fine for me. This is just a pivot, but I've dealt with all the things that are here. It's just a matter of now I've got to meet someone where they're at instead of just trying to pull people into my sales pipeline, if you will, that are already aligned at the 5th stage, because most people aren't right now, and that's totally fine and understandable. And quite frankly, the one thing that totally matches out the same for me is even in that vision work, when I'm working with a CEO who wants to navigate some type of transition, it's always around fear and uncertainty anyway. That's what's keeping them stuck. So here we are, we're dealing with fear and uncertainty just in different contexts. But the solutions to that are the same. So that is very quickly, rapidly what I wanted to share as, and I wanted to, Avin, I want you to be able to ask anything you want or participate in regards to anything you want to add from your perspective. And then I think we should open it up to some dialogue with folks, because this is something I would say no matter with questions, it's going to come up. So I really wanted to make sure I shared some content that people could walk away with regardless.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Chris. And anybody that has questions, you can jot them down or in the chat or be thinking about them, and then you can jump in and we'll unmute. But to me, the biggest, I've got a couple stars here, is like you said, we can't see our own blind spots. And to me, that is key right there. And goes back to some of the other things that you recommended. Like, that's huge, and I'm going to be thinking on that quite a bit. If we can go back and get really, I know, with Chris, does a lot of executive coaching, and you're working with really, high performers. And I know it gets very practical. Let me ask you, when it comes to the things you were talking about at the beginning and how we can maybe put ourselves, I don't know if you use the word state or not, but basically put ourselves in the right state. Realistically, any recommendations for how we actually do that? Because we have the best of intentions, but then we get started with work and then it's pretty chaotic right now. How do we practically implement into our day the breathing, et cetera, to really manage our state, to be in that state, to be able to actually see the opportunity? Practically, what can we do to make sure we don't just blow through the day? Okay, so that's a really good question, and I'm going to give you I'll give you some perspective from what I do. I'm not you, but the fact of the matter is, I'll share a little bit of neuroscience here. The first thing is state basically is, if you don't say what state mean, probably most of it kind of get it, an idea, but state's basically where my psychology and physiology is at the same time, right? So where is your physiology and where is your psychology? And how do I impact that? Well, basically the physiology side
is like a downstream effect. And in essence, a downstream effect meaning that I put myself, like, I can be angry, that's a state. Typically they're tied to emotion. I can have fear, I can have anxiety. In fact, that someone just hired me today to work with one of their or their kid's older kid, but regardless, who's locked in anxiety and locked in panic right now. And he's like, man, can you help my son? You've helped me so much. And I'm like, sure, we can do that. But the fact of the matter is, what I'm going to have to do with him is I'm going to have to help him get out of that state. And it's not just like, okay, just change what you're thinking right now. It's too hard to do when you're in it. And so we say, okay, well, what do we do then? We need to build in certain practice and protocol. And I think the number one thing we can do is, like, you have to change, like, you have to basically align yourself to change your physiology, to change the state. One is through, okay, I can think my way through this through thought, changing my thinking. But in most cases, we're trying to override something. It's like emergency brakes on, a few clicks. And I'm trying to override it by positive thinking. Oh, I'm going to blow sunshine up my ass. I'm going to, I'm trying to get out of the state, and I'm having a really hard time. That is why movement is really important. Getting exercise is really important. And also practicing resonance breathing is probably one of the top things I can really recommend here, because it is idiot proof. I listened to 2 tones that are broken out in patterns of 5-6 or 6-6. Basically, if I just breathe in on one tone, breathe out in another tone, breathe in on one tone, breathe out in another tone, I can't screw that up. And if I do it for at least 10 minutes, I've done this with blood pressure cuff for myself. I will change my blood pressure. I will change how my body feels in the state. If I got to do that 3 times a day, then so flippin' be it. That's 10, 20, 30 minutes. Otherwise, I can run an override. And quite frankly, guys, we're in a different era now. You're going to have to do more with less. More with less, and less is more anyway. You might want to write that down. Do more with less. Less is more anyway. The door opens in, not out. A lot of us entrepreneurs have wired ourselves to go, 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 push, 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 force, force, force. Well, the problem is that's a bullshit paradigm anyway. Quite frankly, it gets outcome and gets results. That's beautiful thing of it, but it only runs so long until we burn out. And right now, we're going to have to do more or less and be okay with it. Be okay with it. And hey, if you're working a 6-hour day, come up with 1 or 3 things you're getting done that day and call it good. You're working a 3-hour day, I don't care. 1 or 3 things you want to accomplish that day, but make sure you're in training neurology. This is a great time if you've already thought about meditation. A great time to get an app like Calm, C-A-L-M, or Headspace, another one, at least with guided meditation, place to start. Hey, practice yoga. If you're like, I don't know about yoga, practicing yoga. Hey, my wife Jolie, Yonker.com, she's doing donation-based yoga. You don't even have to pay for it if you financially are cutting things. She's on every day, and there's other people doing the same kind of thing. But this is a great time to do something that's going to get you out of your head, which is part of the problem. It always has been. You just didn't notice it before.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps for me. We can, if we like, we can open up to.
I think it's a great idea. Let's do it.
Questions, and I would also say, you can share if you have certain questions or maybe observations from the past couple of weeks related,
great.
Or challenges. I mean, feel free to throw out anything that anyone has, and feel free, anybody that wants to jump in. I guess I'll just unmute everybody if that works. Anybody can feel free to jump right in. Might be some awkward silence for a minute, but anybody can just jump right in and ask a question, make an observation, or just maybe a challenge that you're dealing with over the last couple of weeks that's relevant. We work through.
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? So like, there's a plus and minus, right? The bigger the company, and I have Fortune 500 experience, so I can speak pretty intelligently about this. Is the bigger the company, typically, if they're being run well, they have a lot of cash, and they can weather a storm like this and even maintain and keep key personnel and just navigate through it. But the downside of a big company is they're not usually very good at pivoting. They can't pivot on a dime, and so they're slow to respond on that. So it's like, I can weather the storm a bit, but I've got to find a way to navigate fast enough. And so, but that's a trend that hasn't changed too much in the last year or two. Anyway, even larger companies is they're trying to find ways to be more dynamic. Not saying that they have all done a good job in that, but that's a case in point. The other part of it is that there's industries right now that need a good market to survive, like a retail per se, and the retail world is shut down. And so like if they're not, and if they needed to sustain or grow and they can't now, they're going to have to like basically go to that, like, how do we re-engineer the business to look differently? And it could be like closing stores. It could be changing our online presence. And so that there's going to have to be different people in different seats. And I think there's going to be a lot of changes and shifts in regards to how that's done. I think the best part about what we're going through right now on a health standpoint is this exposed how fast we haven't been, in some degrees, been able to have good teams in place to adapt to the situation. Someone say, well, we've done an amazing job. Well, I think there's definitely room for improvement and how quick we can go. And the cool thing about, at least on the side of America, not to put any other countries down, but we're, as a capitalistic, entrepreneuristic society, we've been very quick to, in some cases, pivot. Like, look at, like, hey, we got companies doing, working, like Ford's working with 3M, and there's a collaboration. Boom! All of a sudden, Dyson, in a matter of like 10 days, started producing, like, hey, we can make ventilators. Here's how we're going to do it. And companies basically reprofiling and retooling maybe some of what they've done. And those are bigger companies that are able to adapt and grow. But I think my concern is some of the people that are showing up here that might have a smaller business, and like, well, this is my industry. This is what I do. And then you may have to really start thinking about it as well. Hey, I mean, everyone at one time bought probably horse whips and, a saddle or whatever, right? Like buggy sales were probably really good for a period of time, but, shit changes and we have to be okay to change our story. The two biggest illusions that we have is who are we? Who am I as a person? And then, what do we do? Those are just because you do something doesn't make you who you are. And we identify often with our role or with our company, but this is a good time to really just look at that more in a whole level of like, really, how do I want to serve is probably a better question. And what do I want to do for humanity is a better question to ask ourselves. Where can I, do something, that's going to benefit and be better for the greater good, regardless. Those are better questions to ask ourselves, especially when we're journaling and each day, which I hope a lot of you are, hint, hint. But I think that those would be good questions to ask because, so maybe something would have to change or shift or downsize or whatever, but maybe it could be the greatest thing that ever happened to us because it happened. It could very well be. I think the other thing that Avin, do you want to talk about? I think one thing you brought up was really interesting is about the experience companies are getting from having virtual workforces like this. And what do you believe is going to, from someone who's been virtual and built your business around being virtual, hence why you're in Europe. What do you believe, will be like more of will have some stickiness around? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I feel so strongly that there's going to be major shifts coming out of this is because I see it so strongly, even just with like the remote. So, as Chris alluded to, I've worked remotely and run companies remotely for 13 years. And not like I'm not putting down freelancers at all, but just to be clear, I'm not talking like I freelance remotely. Like I've run companies that we're fully remote. And so I've, loved that and have seen the power of that for years, but it's been something that's kind of off to the side and not mainstream. But just even seeing how corporations have adapted in the last couple of weeks. No, I don't expect everyone to stay remote, but I would bet the last dollar I have that 6 months from now, or 6 months from the time that we can all leave our house and go back to quote unquote normal life, we're going to have many more companies working remotely much more of the time. So just like as an example there, I see that happening, and I see how people are realizing, like I was just on a call earlier today with a company who's always worked in the office and they're forced to be remote now. I just asked them like, hey, how's that going for everybody? And they said, we were kind of talking to management and like, we're kind of surprised like how much we're getting done. Like we're being so much more productive. Of course, they have their own challenges with it. But anyway, I feel very strongly that companies in general will work remotely more. But that's one out of 1,000 things that are going to change, I think. And Chris, I think to go back to what you said two things that were combined to be pretty powerful. I think you used the example of the two companies in the U.S. that are working together on ventilators, but then earlier you talked about getting in kind of essentially masterminds or connecting with others. I think something that's very powerful there is connecting with people that are in different industries, and not only different industries, but with different strengths, et cetera. Like that's how you see the shifts. I think when you're not so stuck in this is how we do things. Like for example, when I'm talking to Chris, who is in a completely different industry, does completely different things, but when I've seen how he's doing things, or we're bouncing things off each other, or other people that I know that are in different industries, that's where like the wheels start turning for me, and I start seeing opportunity. So to me, that's a powerful takeaway of having those masterminds and connecting with people virtually, but connecting with people that are in completely different industries than what you are, and not in industries, but doing things so differently. That's where I think you see where the shift can take place.
Yeah, I agree. Very good. Very good. And I think it's a good actionable. I love having things that are actionable that people can take away from this and apply this afternoon, tomorrow, that it can be beneficial. Allison, I'm going to address something you posted. I was just reading the box here of comments. Just something to consider is just ask yourself what's different week to week. And, and I think it's a good question just to ask, in regards to how am I feeling? What am I responding to? The cool thing about how we feel, guys and gals, is that how we feel is not an accident. And usually it's a downriver effect, usually from our psychology or the environment we're in. Tension is contagious. So if there's tension in your environment, if I'm not tuned into that tension, I could subconsciously start taking that tension on in my physiology. So pay attention to that in your household. We're all working from home typically at this point, or not typically, we all are. So pay attention to the environment and how, what's going on in the environment, because that's a key. Tension is contagious. And here's another thing that's key. In order for me to create tension, it's a process that is unconscious, meaning that I don't even have to be aware of it. I can actually create tension in my body without even being consciously tuned in. But relaxation, its opposite, is a conscious process. In order for me to go and relax, I actually have to get into my head to do something like meditate, do yoga, breath work, whatever. I have to do something to activate, to downregulate that tension. So that's something to pay attention to that might be helpful to you. So the faster week, it's a good point. We all have to be, a friend of mine said today, a colleague, he's like, we've only been dealing with this for a few weeks here in the States, but I feel like it's in dog years, which I thought was a really interesting perspective, right? How we look at time. But I want to say what to you, Ginger, on that is what am I attached to, right? Like, what am I really, truly attached to that I'm not willing to let go? How I normally operate, because a lot of our friction comes from our level of attachment to what we're not willing to let go. So that's just something else to consider.
That one was for Ginger, but that was pretty powerful for me too. Say that last part again about what we're going to let go, if you would.
So our resistance comes up by not willing to let something go, right? Like, I'm not willing to let this go, right? Like whatever, and I'll ask people sometimes, I'm like, well, I'm not feeling good about this. And typically a question I might ask in a coaching session is, well, what are you resisting? Because if I think about it, if I'm willing to accept, doesn't mean I'm not going to do something about it. If I'm willing to accept what is, then I don't have to, a lot of our stress comes from not willing to accept what is. So what if I could accept what is and then just deal with it and not resist it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And a lot of that anxiety that comes from just trying to hold on to something rather than accepting. That's good. Thanks for sharing that. I know we're wrapping up here. Any last comment, question anyone has? All right. Chris, I believe we'll be able to share the recording with those who registered,
Yes.
right? We'll be sending that video.
Yes, we will.
And Chris, you might have a last comment. I do want to generally thank you, Chris, for sharing this. Like I say, I think there's a lot of tactical things that we can be doing, you know, business-wise and talking about remote, but like the content you just shared, to me, people that actually take that to heart and make change, they're the ones that are most primed to really be able to see the opportunity here. So just really appreciate the content. I think it was really appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for everyone that could make it. Hopefully, I mean, we did this for you. It wasn't for us. Well, it is for me, because it's I feel better because I can help you. So it's our way to contribute to the world. So yeah.
Cool. I'm going to just end on, you know, just even for me, if I'm being selfish, on my biggest takeaways, I'm taking away that we talked about with just doubling down and making sure I'm having these great conversations with other people going in a good direction, but in different industries and different paths. That was really strong. And then I know for me, you know, it's not necessarily tactical business, but the working on my state and taking that time to do the breathing that you talked about, that's going to be a major takeaway for me. So, and the last one is just a quote, is that we can't see our own blind spots, and really needing other people and influence to see that. I think it's really powerful. So I guess thanks everybody for taking time and jumping on. Love to stay in touch, and have a really great rest of your day.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you guys so much.
For more information, go to www.chrisyonker.com. That's ChrisYonker.com.